Silence is the first language of dignity when love has become a room full of strangers. At 8:17 p.m., snow fell softly over East 57th Street, turning the black windows of Manhattan's high-rises into mirrors of gold, blue, and distant white. The Whitlock Meridian Hotel stood 32 stories above the avenue, its glass crown catching the lights of Cartier, Bergdorf Goodman, and the slow river of headlights below. Inside, the lobby glowed with warm amber light, polished Calacatta marble, curved brass railings, and the faint scent of white orchids mixed with winter wool. Leora Bellamy knew every inch of it. She walked across the floor in a deep red silk evening coat, her heels making a quiet sound against the marble she had chosen 6 years earlier from a quarry sample flown in at a cost of $480,000. Above her, the chandelier was not a chandelier in the usual sense, but a suspended constellation of 1,200 hand-blown glass petals arranged to soften the faces of guests as they entered. Beyond the mezzanine windows, the city lights blinked like cold stars over Park Avenue, beautiful from a distance and unforgiving up close. This was her design. The concierge desk sat exactly 12 feet from the eastern column because Leora had measured the natural pause of arriving guests, the half-second when wealthy travelers stopped being passengers and began feeling like owners of the night. The lounge chairs were angled at 27 degrees, not for decoration, but to keep executives from turning their backs on the room. Even the low bronze fragrance vents beneath the orchid wall had been placed to release a trace of cedar and rain every 11 minutes. Nothing here was accidental. When Pierce Whitlock first bought the dying hotel, it had been a cold box of glass and ego, losing nearly $19 million a quarter and written off by every serious hospitality investor in New York. He had been handsome then, desperate beneath his Tom Ford suit, standing in an unfinished lobby with dust on his shoes and fear behind his smile. Leora, born in a rented apartment over a laundromat in Newark and educated through scholarships, late nights, and a stubborn belief in precision, had given him more than taste. She had given him architecture with a pulse. She had given him a brand, a protected design language, and a room investors could price. Now Pierce stood near the central staircase in a midnight Brioni tuxedo, speaking to camera crews as if beauty had always obeyed him. His hair was silvered perfectly at the temples, his smile trained by publicists, his left hand resting lightly against the back of Sloan Mercer, the hotel's PR director. She wore a champagne silk dress that caught every flashbulb and returned it like borrowed sunlight. Leora watched quietly. Investors gathered in clusters of 3 and 4 beneath the glowing ceiling, holding crystal flutes, murmuring about the upcoming expansion to Chicago and the $600 million refinancing package tied to the Meridian lobby concept. A reporter from Architectural Digest asked Pierce how he had turned a failing hotel into the emotional center of modern luxury hospitality. Pierce glanced across the room, not toward Leora, but toward Sloan. Then he smiled. "Vision," he said. Sloan lowered her lashes with practiced modesty, though she had never drawn a floor plan, chosen a stone slab, revised a lighting grid, or stayed awake until 3:40 a.m. Calculating how a lobby could make a lonely guest feel important without making a receptionist feel invisible. Outside, snow struck the glass in small silver lines while the city burned bright behind it, a theater of money and distance. Inside, Leora stood beneath the light she had designed to make other people look warmer than they were. Pierce believed the room belonged to him because his name was on the hotel, because his photograph appeared in Forbes, because men with family office advisors shook his hand before they ever asked who had built the feeling they were buying. He had mistaken ownership for authorship. Leora did not interrupt. She simply looked up at the floating glass petals, counted the rhythm of the scent vents, and remembered the night she saved him from becoming another rich man with an empty building. At exactly 8:29 p.m., the orchestra softened, the cameras turned, and Pierce stepped closer to Sloan beneath the gold Meridian emblem. Leora's face remained calm, elegant, unreadable. The snow kept falling outside. The lobby kept shining around her. And for the first time that night, the room felt colder than the street. The cameras found Pierce before they found the truth. At 8:34 p.m., beneath the suspended glass petals, he entertained 3 investors from Alden Row Capital while snow pressed softly against the high windows like white static. His Brioni tuxedo caught the amber lobby lights. His cufflinks flashed near Sloane Mercer's waist, and every polished surface in the Whitlock Meridian reflected him, as if the hotel itself had been trained to admire him. In the darker corner, near the orchid wall, Leora Bellamy stood still. Pierce smiled under the lights, while Leora remained in the shadowed edge of her own creation, framed by a bronze column she had once moved 18 inches to widen the entry sight line. Sloane leaned into the applause in her champagne silk dress, one hand resting on the acrylic podium, the other touching the gold meridian emblem, as if she had earned the right to bless it. The city lights above Park Avenue shimmered behind her, blue and silver through the snowfall, making her look radiant to anyone who did not know what radiance had cost. A reporter asked who had first imagined the lobby's signature breathing light system, and Pierce gave a soft, amused shrug before turning the microphone toward Sloane. She understood the feeling. Sloane smiled as if that answer meant something. She spoke about softness, renewal, intuitive luxury, and emotional hospitality, each phrase polished and hollow enough to glide through the room without touching a single fact. Leora watched the investors nod, not because they understood design, but because Pierce had taught them which woman to believe tonight. In the split glow of the lobby, the scene divided itself with painful precision. Under the chandelier, Pierce laughed as cameras captured his triumph. By the orchid wall, Leora stood silent while the scent vents released cedar and rain exactly on schedule. The room obeyed her even while the room ignored her. At 8:41 p.m., Malcolm Voss arrived through the east entrance in a charcoal overcoat dusted with snow, carrying no briefcase, only a sealed black portfolio embossed with the Bellamy name. He had the careful posture of a man who had spent 30 years turning invisible ownership into consequences wealthy men could not charm away. He saw Leora before Pierce saw him. Leora gave one small nod. Malcolm approached just close enough for his voice to stay private beneath the orchestra. He said the master design rights registry was intact, the design patent continuity ledger had been preserved, and the luxury trade dress priority claim could be filed before midnight if she chose. Leora did not blink. Pierce raised his glass across the room, still performing gratitude toward Sloane, still unaware that the foundation beneath his story had begun to move. Malcolm added that the source specification escrow authority covered the lighting algorithms, the fragrance intervals, the VIP circulation map, and every derivative spatial work attached to the Meridian expansion package. The numbers were clean. $600 million in refinancing exposure, 21 pending investor reliance documents, for city permits tied to the lobby concept, and one woman whose name had been erased from all of them. Leora looked toward the stage where Sloane accepted another round of applause. "Prepare it," she said. On the podium, Sloane lifted the commemorative crystal model of the lobby, a small transparent replica of the staircase, columns, and glowing ceiling that Pierce had planned to present to her as a public symbol of creative credit. Her fingers slipped slightly from nerves or vanity, and the crystal edge struck the brass base of the microphone. The only sound was the clean crack of glass splitting through a room that had forgotten how to be quiet. For 1 second, Pierce's smile weakened. For 1 second, Sloane looked down at the fracture running across the tiny lobby she had never designed. In the corner, Leora remained still, her face composed beneath the dim gold light, while Malcolm opened the portfolio and slid a cream authorization page onto the narrow service table beside her. She signed with the name Pierce had tried to erase, Leora Bellamy. The nib moved once, slow and final. Snow kept falling over Manhattan. The cameras kept glowing under the chandelier, and Pierce kept performing because he had not yet understood that applause was not ownership. At 8:46 p.m., the orchestra resumed as if the cracked crystal model had been nothing more than an awkward pause. Pierce stood beneath the chandelier with his practiced smile restored, one hand lifting his champagne flute toward the mezzanine, where two private equity partners from Alden Row Capital watched the cameras reset. Sloane Mercer glowed beside him in her champagne silk dress, bright under the amber lights, pretending the fractured replica at her feet had not just divided the room into before and after. In the darker edge near the orchid wall, Leora Bellamy folded her signed authorization page into Malcolm Voss's black portfolio without changing expression. Pierce smiled under the lights, while Leora stood in the quiet corner, the snow behind her turning Manhattan's high windows into cold silver panels. Malcolm lowered his voice and told her the architectural identity protection filing would hold. The derivative spatial works reversion would trigger review on every expansion rendering, and the operational aesthetic risk authority could place an emergency hold on the lighting, fragrance, and circulation systems before the board met at 9:30 the next morning. Leora listened, calm as marble. Across the lobby, Pierce accepted congratulations from a man wearing a Patek Philippe Nautilus and a navy cashmere coat, while Sloane tilted her face toward a photographer from a luxury travel magazine. Nobody asked why the woman who had designed the room was standing alone. Nobody noticed that the room's warmth no longer reached her. "File only what is mine," Leora said. Malcolm gave a single nod. She stepped away from the orchid wall and crossed the lobby at a measured pace, passing the bronze vents that released cedar and rain every 11 minutes, passing the lounge chairs angled at 27 degrees, passing the concierge desk placed exactly 12 feet from the eastern column. The hotel staff saw her and straightened without knowing why. Guests turned slightly as she passed, feeling the authority of someone who did not need to announce possession because possession had once begun in her hands. At the stage, Pierce was still speaking, still smiling, still selling Sloane as vision while standing inside Leora's work. The split image was cruelly perfect. Under the chandelier, Pierce smiled inside a story he had rewritten. Near the shadowed exit, Leora moved silently through the architecture that remembered her. At the glass service table near the private elevator, Leora opened her small black clutch and removed the ebony sketch pencil she had carried since the first Meridian draft. It was worn smooth at the center, the wood darkened by years of use. The silver cap dented from the night she had stayed awake until 3:40 a.m., redesigning the arrival flow that later added $72 million to the hotel's valuation. She placed it beside an untouched dessert plate, a white porcelain dish stamped with the Meridian crest in gold. The pencil rolled once, then stopped. The only sound was the soft tap of black wood against porcelain. Pierce noticed at last. His smile faltered for half a second, but he stayed beneath the lights because the cameras were still watching. Leora looked at him from across the lobby, not with anger, not with pleading, but with the distant clarity of a woman who had just removed herself from the illusion he called marriage. Sloane whispered something to him and touched his sleeve, trying to pull his attention back to the applause. Leora turned toward the revolving glass doors. Malcolm walked 2 steps behind her, already typing a message to initiate the Master Design Rights Registry notice and the luxury trade dress priority claim before 10 p.m. Snow swirled beyond the entrance, softening East 57th Street, blurring the headlights, making the city look almost merciful from inside the heated lobby. Pierce finally left the stage and crossed 10 feet toward her, careful not to seem desperate. "Leora," he said. She paused with one hand on her coat collar, city light cutting across her cheek, the lobby glowing behind her like a beautiful mistake. "Luxury is not something you can borrow from my silence." Then she walked out into the snow, and the revolving door closed behind her with a smooth, final hush. At 9:12 p.m., the Blacktown car moved south through the snow, while the Whitlock Meridian still glowed behind Leora like a palace built on borrowed memory. East 57th Street blurred past in silver streaks, the city lights reflected in the wet glass, and the towers above Manhattan looked warm from the outside, while carrying entire floors of cold decisions within them. Leora sat in the back seat with her coat folded across her lap, her face calm, her hands steady, the red traffic lights sliding over her skin like quiet warnings. She did not look back. At the hotel, Pierce remained beneath the chandelier, performing confidence for Alden Row Capital's partners as if charm could seal a fracture before it spread. Sloane stood close to him in champagne silk, smiling for a photographer beside the cracked crystal lobby model, while staff quietly removed broken fragments from the brass base. In the darker rear seat of the town car, Leora opened Malcolm Voss's black portfolio and reviewed the cream authorization page bearing her maiden name. The split screen was merciless. Under the lobby lights, Pierce performed control. Behind tinted glass, Leora prepared consequence. By 9:38 p.m., The car stopped outside Bellamy Archives, a private document vault on West 24th Street, 11 blocks from the High Line and 3 floors above a closed art restoration studio that smelled faintly of varnish, wool, and old paper. Snow tapped against the narrow windows, and beyond them, the city's high-rise lights shimmered through the storm like distant jewelry no one could touch. Malcolm unlocked the steel archive door with a matte black access card, then led Leora past rows of flat files, climate-controlled drawers, and leather blueprint tubes labeled by year. Everything before the Meridian expansion is still under your master design rights registry, he said. Leora stopped at drawer B-17. Inside lay the first lobby sketches from 2018. The curved staircase, the eastern column correction, the 27-degree lounge chair angle, the cedar and rain fragrance schedule, and the lighting grid that responded to guest density every 11 minutes. Her handwriting ran along the margins in graphite, precise and patient, before Pierce had investors, before Sloan had cameras, before anyone called the room his vision. This was never decoration, Malcolm said. He placed 4 private legal instruments on the archival table: architectural identity protection filing, design patent continuity ledger, source specification escrow authority, and derivative spatial works reversion. Each title carried the quiet weight of a door closing. Leora touched the oldest sheet with 2 fingers, remembering the night she had drawn the staircase on a diner napkin after Pierce admitted the hotel was bleeding $19 million a quarter. The paper smelled of cedar, dust, and time. Across town, Pierce was still under amber lights, charming reporters as if his name on the building could overwrite the hand that had shaped its soul. In the archive's dim glow, Leora stood alone beside the drawings, neither wounded nor triumphant, only exact. Malcolm slid a fountain pen across the table and said the investor reliance breach notice could reach Alden Row before midnight, while the Operational Aesthetic Risk Authority could place a provisional hold on any unauthorized modification to the lobby systems by 6 a.m. Leora read every line. Then she signed. The only sound was the sharp press of the pen nib cutting black ink into the Bellamy letterhead. At 9:57 p.m., she removed the leather band from the oldest blueprint tube and unrolled the original Meridian lobby drawing across the table. The paper resisted for a moment, curled from age and storage, then flattened beneath her palms as if it recognized her. In the lower right corner, beneath the first drawing of the staircase Pierce had claimed as destiny, her signature weighted in clean graphite, Leora Bellamy. Malcolm looked down at it and said, "You credited the face tonight. Now the law will reveal the foundation." Leora's expression did not change. Outside, snow covered the sidewalks, city lights trembled in the glass, and the hotel across Manhattan kept shining with a brilliance it no longer owned. At 10:18 p.m., Bellamy Archives was quiet enough for Leora to hear the snow ticking against the narrow windows above West 24th Street. The original Meridian drawings lay flat beneath brass paperweights, their graphite lines clean under the green-shaded lamps, while Manhattan's high-rise lights shimmered through the storm like distant promises made by people who rarely kept them. Malcolm Voss stood across from her with 3 sealed notices arranged in a precise row: the luxury trade dress priority claim, the derivative spatial works reversion demand, and the investor reliance breach notice addressed to Alden Row Capital. Leora chose the first envelope. Across town, Pierce still stood beneath the lobby chandelier, performing ease beside a managing director in a camel coat, while Sloan posed near the fractured crystal model, as if the crack were merely an unfortunate detail. Under the amber lights, Pierce performed confidence. In the dim archive, Leora reclaimed authorship. Malcolm read the first clause aloud, his voice low and exact, explaining that all promotional use of the Meridian lobby image, all expansion renderings, all mirror design packages, and all hospitality valuation materials tied to the original spatial concept would be suspended pending proof of authorized design ownership. Leora listened without moving. He then opened the Source Specification Escrow Authority, the document that controlled the lighting algorithms, the cedar and rain fragrance intervals, the guest density response grid, and the VIP circulation map hidden beneath the hotel's sense of ease. "This is the nerve system," Malcolm said. The protected filings covered the lobby's modular lighting housings, spatial sequencing system, guest flow configuration, and signature material assemblies, each one tied to Leora's original design patent record. At 10:31 p.m., he placed a slim black tablet beside the oldest blueprint and rotated it toward her. On screen were 21 investor reliance files for pending city review packets, a $600 million refinancing exposure summary, and the proposed Chicago expansion deck using the same lobby concept Pierce had just credited to Sloan. Each file carried the polished confidence of money that had never expected to be questioned. Leora touched the screen once. The archive lights reflected across her face, calm and unreadable, while miles away cameras still made Pierce look taller than he was. Malcolm added the architectural identity protection filing to the queue and explained that the hotel could continue operating, but it could not legally reproduce, modify, promote, franchise, or monetize the signature lobby system without facing layered IP review. Leora gave a small nod. "Then we do not destroy the building," she said. "We remove the lie." Malcolm slid forward a final cream folder embossed with a new name, Bellamy House. It was not a retaliation filing, not a divorce demand, not a plea for recognition, but the formation papers for a design rights firm dedicated to women whose work had been hidden behind louder names. Its first funding line came from Leora's private savings, $2. For million accumulated through quiet advisory work Pierce had never cared enough to ask about. Its first mission was simple: protect the name on the drawing before the world applauded the name on the building. Leora uncapped the black fountain pen again. The only sound was the deliberate stroke of her maiden name crossing the Bellamy House formation page. At 10:44 p.m., Malcolm transmitted the notices through a secure legal channel to Alden Rowe, Whitlock Meridian Holdings, the City Review Office, and Pierce's executive council. One by one, the status lights turned from gray to blue, clean as winter stars. At the hotel, Pierce lifted his glass under the chandelier and smiled for one more photograph, while behind him the cracked crystal lobby model caught the light along its broken seam. In the archive's darker room, Leora sealed the original blueprint tube with a fresh black band and placed it inside a fireproof drawer marked Bellamy. The metal drawer closed with a cold, certain click. Snow thickened over Manhattan, the city glittered from its towers, and somewhere between the lobby and the archive, applause became evidence. At 6:03 a.m., the snow over Manhattan had turned the edges of Park Avenue soft and white, but inside the Whitlock Meridian's 31st floor boardroom, every surface felt sharp. The city lights were fading behind the glass towers, pale blue morning pressing against the windows, and the lobby below still glowed with the warmth Leora had designed before anyone in that room knew how to sell it. Pierce Whitlock stood at the head of the long walnut table in a charcoal Brioni suit, smiling as though the night before had ended in victory instead of transmission receipts. He had not slept. Across the table, Alden Rowe Capital's outside risk counsel opened a thin silver laptop and read the subject line aloud. Investor Reliance Breach Notice, Derivative Spatial Works Reversion Demand, Architectural Identity Protection Filing, Source Specification Escrow Authority. The room went quiet. At the lobby level, Sloan Mercer was still laughing softly with a lifestyle journalist beneath the amber chandelier, her champagne silk dress catching the morning cruise camera lights, as she described, an emotional reawakening of hospitality. 31 floors above her, Pierce's smile tightened, while three financing partners stared at legal language worth $600 million. Under the chandelier, Sloan performed brilliance. Above the city, Pierce began losing the room. One investor, Martin Kessler, tapped a printed rendering of the Chicago expansion, where the Meridian staircase, orchid wall, lighting grid, and reception axis had been duplicated almost exactly. He asked who owned the original design rights. Pierce gave a measured answer about corporate development, brand stewardship, and executive oversight, but the words slid across the table without landing. The counsel from Alden Rowe adjusted her glasses and said the design patent continuity ledger listed Leora Bellamy as primary author, originator, and retained rights holder on multiple protected spatial elements. Pierce looked toward his general counsel. His general counsel did not rescue him. At 6:19 a.m., a notification appeared on the boardroom screen. Corporate counsel had ordered a temporary promotional hold pending IP review. The hotel's media team had already pulled the lobby from the Chicago expansion deck, the Miami investor packet, the private wealth presentation, and the upcoming architectural digest feature. A second alert followed from the City Review Council, acknowledging receipt and flagging 4 permit packets tied to the replicated lobby system for authorship risk review. A third came from the escrow administrator, placing an emergency hold on modifications to the lighting algorithm, fragrance intervals, and VIP circulation logic until authorization could be verified. Pierce set his coffee cup down too hard. The only sound was the thin porcelain cracks spreading beneath his thumb. No one moved. Downstairs, Sloane paused mid-interview when a junior publicist whispered into her ear, and for the first time, the light around her seemed less like admiration and more like exposure. Upstairs, the Alden Rowe partner closed the expansion binder and said they could not advance refinancing against an asset clouded by authorship risk, trade dress priority conflict, and derivative design uncertainty. Pierce objected, saying the hotel still belonged to Whitlock Meridian Holdings, that his name was on the tower, that the market understood him as the visionary. The council answered with professional calm. Ownership of the building is not proof of authorship of the value. Snow slid down the boardroom glass in thin white lines, and beyond it, Manhattan's towers caught the weak morning sun like polished knives. Pierce looked down through the window at the lobby 31 floors below, still beautiful, still busy, still filled with guests who had no idea the room had become a legal fault line. In the hotel's bright center, Sloane stood beneath borrowed light, pretending she had created a language she could not read. In the darker reflection of the boardroom glass, Pierce saw himself standing inside an empire that no longer answered when he spoke. At 7:26 a.m., the emergency design review began in a private conference suite 2 floors above the Whitlock Meridian lobby, while the snow outside softened the city into a pale blur of glass, traffic, and winter light. Pierce sat beneath a row of recessed ceiling lights with his tie loosened by half an inch, still trying to smile for the room as if authority could be restored by posture. Sloane stood beside a digital screen in her champagne silk dress, holding a cream presentation folder filled with mood boards, soft-focus lobby photographs, and phrases like modern intimacy and emotional arrival. No one at the table opened their notebooks. Across town, in the dim calm of Bellamy House's temporary office on West 24th Street, Leora reviewed scholarship applications from 3 young women seeking protection for their first design portfolios. Pierce forced a laugh under the conference lights, while in a darker room, Leora sat quietly beneath a green-shaded lamp, building a future from the name he had erased. The lead architect from Harrow and Vale asked Sloane to explain the original rationale behind the 27-degree lounge orientation and the eastern column correction. Sloane smiled, glanced at Pierce, then spoke about warmth, softness, and intuitive elegance, but her words circled the question without entering it. A financial advisor from Alden Rowe asked whether the proposed Chicago hotel could replace the Meridian lobby language without triggering the derivative spatial works reversion demand. Pierce answered too quickly, saying they would create something fresh. The architect looked at the frozen rendering on the screen and said, "This is not a new concept. It is a replica with better lighting." The room lost its polite oxygen. At 7:41 a.m., Pierce's general counsel received a follow-up notice from Malcolm Voss citing the architectural identity protection filing, the luxury trade dress priority claim, and the source specification escrow authority as active constraints on any replicated spatial experience. The notice also included a valuation warning. Any investor material relying on the disputed lobby system could require restatement under authorship risk exposure. Pierce stared at the words as if legal precision were a personal insult. Sloane's hand tightened around her folder. Downstairs, morning guests crossed the marble floor beneath the floating glass petals, unaware that the scent of cedar and rain, the angle of the chairs, and the warmth of the arrival light had become evidence. Upstairs, Sloane tried once more to own the room. She placed her mood board on the walnut table, showing beige fabric, pearl-toned walls, and a glossy image of the Meridian staircase cropped from a press shoot. "We can reframe the story," she said. Nobody responded. Across town, Leora signed the first Bellamy House intake approval for a single mother from Queens whose restaurant design had been copied by a larger hospitality group. The only sound was the clean slide of the pen across the new letterhead. In the conference suite, Pierce picked up Sloane's mood board and turned it toward the architect. The paper looked expensive, but it had no structure beneath the gloss. A junior associate quietly removed the Chicago expansion model from the table, its miniature staircase and orchid wall too close to the disputed Meridian design to remain visible. The tiny brass column snapped loose as he lifted it. The only sound was the small metallic ping of a false monument breaking away from its base. Sloane looked at the fallen piece, then at Pierce, and her polished confidence thinned into irritation. She whispered that he should have handled his wife before involving investors. Pierce looked at her then, really looked, and saw not vision, not loyalty, not brilliance, but ambition without architecture. Outside, snow continued to fall against the high windows, city lights fading into morning, and the empire that once praised borrowed beauty began learning the cost of not knowing how it was made. 3 years later, at 8:05 p.m., Snow returned to Manhattan with the same quiet patience. But Leora Bellamy no longer watched the city from the edge of someone else's room. She stood on the 42nd floor of the Halden Arts Tower on West 53rd Street, inside a glass-walled conference hall where city lights stretched below like a field of diamonds scattered across black velvet. Her deep red gown moved softly when she crossed the stage, her pearl earrings catching the cool white spotlight, and behind her the Bellamy House emblem appeared on a 12-foot screen in clean gold lines. This time, her name was first. The room held 400 guests, architects, venture partners, design attorneys, foundation directors, young creators, and women who had once been told their work was inspired assistance instead of authorship. Bellamy House had grown from one archive table and $4 million in private savings into a $180 million design rights foundation, built through settlement proceeds, private endowments, advisory revenue, and offices in New York, Chicago, Atlanta, and Oakland. Its signature program, the Creative Ownership Fellowship, had already funded 312 women and filed more than 900 protected design claims through master design rights registry reviews, luxury trade dress priority claims, source specification escrow authorities, and architectural identity protection filings. Leora did not mention Pierce. Across town, the Whitlock Meridian still glowed on East 57th Street, but its expansion floor was half dark, its Chicago project sold to another group, and its lobby no longer appeared in investor decks without a legal disclosure attached. Pierce Whitlock stood inside a private mezzanine lounge, smiling too brightly with two bankers from a smaller fund, while a snow-streaked window reflected the older lines around his eyes. Under the mezzanine lounge lights, Pierce performed survival. In the brighter tower across town, Leora stood quietly in the power she had built. Sloane Mercer was gone from the hotel's press materials, replaced by vague language about historic creative partnerships and updated leadership philosophy. Pierce's black Tom Ford suit still fit, his watch still shone, and his smile still arrived before his sincerity did, but the room no longer leaned toward him the way rooms once had. At Bellamy House, Malcolm Voss sat in the front row, older, silver-haired, and visibly proud, while a young designer from Queens stepped onto the stage to receive the first Bellamy Spatial Authorship Grant. She had redesigned a neighborhood restaurant and kept her name on every drawing because Leora's foundation paid for her filings before anyone could take credit for them. The audience stood. Leora handed the woman a cream certificate embossed with the Bellamy House seal, not as charity, but as proof. The only sound was the firm press of the gold seal locking into the paper. At 8:47 p.m., Leora delivered her closing remarks beneath the city lights. She spoke of authorship, not revenge, ownership, not bitterness, consequence, not noise. She said a woman's silence should never be mistaken for surrender, and a beautiful room should never hide the name of the person who gave it breath. Her voice stayed calm. Across town, Pierce received a message from Malcolm's office confirming that the final settlement restrictions on the Meridian lobby branding would remain permanent, with no extension rights, no derivative use privilege, and no quiet reinstatement through asset restructuring. He stared at the screen while snow blurred the city beyond the glass. In the mezzanine lounge, his performance stopped. At Bellamy House, Leora stepped down from the stage as hundreds of people applauded, and for the first time in years, the sound did not feel stolen. At 9:16 p.m., after the Bellamy House ceremony, Leora stepped into a quiet glass corridor overlooking West 53rd Street, where snow moved between the towers and the city lights shone cold and beautiful beneath her. Her red gown caught the reflection of the skyline. Her cream coat rested over one arm, and the Bellamy House seal on the certificate in her hand still held the faint warmth of the embossing press. Behind the closed ceremony hall doors, 400 guests continued speaking her name with respect, not as Pierce Whitlock's wife, not as the woman behind a hotel, but as the founder who had taught an entire industry that authorship could not be borrowed from silence. She stood alone without feeling alone. At 9:19 p.m., Pierce appeared at the far end of the corridor in a black Tom Ford suit, older now, thinner in the face, carrying the posture of a man who had spent 3 years learning the difference between ownership and credit. Snow blurred the city behind him, and the glass walls reflected them like two figures from separate lives meeting at the edge of a story that had already ended. For once, he did not smile first. In one hand, he held a folded copy of the final settlement restrictions Malcolm Voss had sent that evening. No extension rights, no derivative lobby use privilege, no revival of the Meridian design language through asset restructuring, no promotional claim over the patented spatial system Leora had created. Every design patent, usage right, and derivative claim behind the lobby had been pulled out of his control. Pierce stopped 6 feet away from her, close enough to speak softly, far enough to understand he no longer had the right to step closer without permission. He told her Whitlock Meridian had survived, but not as an empire. The Chicago expansion had been sold, the Miami deck had been withdrawn, the refinancing had closed at half its original ambition, and every investor document now carried a permanent disclosure tying the hotel's signature value to her authorship. The lobby still stood, but it no longer belonged to his legend. "I let her take credit for the one thing that made people believe in me," he said. Leora looked through the glass at the snow falling over Manhattan, calm as the night she had walked out. Pierce said he had mistaken her grace for availability, her silence for consent, and her loyalty for something he could spend in public without consequence. He admitted Sloan had left when the cameras stopped helping her, and that 3 design firms had spent $8.6 million failing to recreate what Leora had built because they kept copying the shape without understanding the system. His voice lowered when he said he was sorry. The corridor held the quiet between them. From the ceremony hall, distant applause rose and faded, while below them taxis moved along the white-lined street like small yellow sparks under the storm. Leora did not interrupt him. She had once wanted this apology so badly that she imagined it would repair something, but time had made her wiser than that. Forgiveness, she had learned, was not a door someone else could walk through. It was a key she could choose to put down. Pierce asked if they could begin again, not as they were, but as people who finally understood the truth. Leora turned toward him then, her expression gentle, dignified, and completely free. She forgave him without returning to him, because the woman he wanted back had existed only in the shadow of a room he never truly owned. Her life was no longer waiting inside his regret. Her name was on the work, her patents were protected, her foundation was alive, and the silence he once borrowed had become a voice for women who would never again let their brilliance disappear behind a louder man. Pierce lowered his eyes, understanding the answer before she spoke. Leora held the Bellamy House certificate against her chest and gave him the final kindness of clarity. No debt remains. Snow kept falling over Manhattan, and the city continued to shine above the white streets, but Leora no longer needed its lights to prove she was luminous. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.